Anyway, I think here's maybe we'll pick up the actual video. Hello. It's so weird. There was like a pre-video video this time, and often there is actually. I'll record a little bit and then sort of pick up the main thing. Sort of things that might be released someday in a kind of behind-the-scenes box set or something. I don't know. Anyway, I just wanted to open, actually, since we're bridging into talking about sync work in the sort of tablet format videos on this channel, I wanted to just give a shout out to my friend Alan, who has this channel called Octopus Ride, where he does amazing analysis on amazing works of art. And he's currently moving through a piece called Face Off, which you might remember from 1997. Alan and I share a bit of a fixation on Nicolas Cage. He's a very, very interesting actor. And actually, I think an actor who is not taken anywhere near seriously enough. His kind of wild, intense, energetic shifts and things are really part of a deep sort of surrealism practice, which he talks about in a recent interview. I can't remember where, but I'm sure you can find it. I think he is really a very shamanic actor because he brings a strangeness to everything that he does, basically. And Face Off is also just a very strange movie for many reasons that don't even involve Nicolas Cage's energy, which Alan is doing an incredibly excellent job of documenting and unpacking. So I've only watched the first part. I'm very excited to watch the second part later today. But today, I want to go back and look at in many ways, the great original sync film. Now, I know there were many sync films that preceded this, but this is the film where, in my view anyway, certain key threads and also aesthetic innovations and images and techniques and so on, various things that were happening, Joe pulled all this stuff together and added quite a bit of his own innovation and his own flavor, and created a film that really did go viral. It captured the world for a kind of 24, 48-hour news cycle. It was sent to me just by kind of artist friend of mine, artist technology friend of mine, who had come across it somewhere on the internet, probably on Back to the Future Day, or something. I don't remember exactly when this happened. And he just related to it as this creative, crazy, cool internet video thing. And he sent it to me, and this was way before I was involved in the sync community. And so I had no idea about any of this stuff. And I had the same reaction to it. I thought Back to the Future Predicts 9/11 was just a amazing thing, but I kind of thought it must be a joke of some sort. That was really my reaction to it, because it was too smart and too sophisticated. In my opinion, very obviously, just in terms of the way it's edited together as a video piece. And just the wit, Joe's humor is so on display, and it's so it's the kind of wit that comes from a brilliant mind, and so I recognized all that in it, but then what he was saying seemed to me to be so impossible at that point in time that I thought, well, it must be some kind of meta joke, a very clever internet gaffe of some kind. And I loved it, and I shared it with a lot of people very enthusiastically, but then I just kind of forgot about it. It was just another thing that came through my video window. And then, some years later, the synchronicity question erupted into my life. And erupted initially in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11, I would like to say. When my early sync experiences started happening, 9/11 was not a thing that I was thinking about or ideating about in any way. It wasn't. I I found my way back to that aspect of the sync web quite autonomously and naturally. For me, it was through my work on the John Carpenter films. Because John Carpenter precogged it in Prince of Darkness and especially in The Mouth of Madness. There are quite excellent image matches and other funny things going on in that film. And then he really precogs it in Ghosts of Mars, which was released just some weeks prior to 9/11. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But I perceived that going on in that film, and it's like, how can this be? Anyways, it's a whole other story for another time. And then I remembered Back to the Future Predicts, and I watched it, and I said to myself, aha, yes. There is at least one other human being that has understood the same thing about these films. And now, and then when I returned to it, I watched it with a whole different level of attention. And I really started to take seriously the miracles that Joe sequences for us in this film. So, just a second, I'm going to get something to levitate my laptop a little bit so that the airflow is better. And I'm going to use my personal automatic drawing journal. So this is very much kind of placing the laptop on, I don't know, some kind of a sacred object here or something. Because this is, in my belief, a very profoundly magical cut of video. It just really, really is. I think it's the largest portal currently open, and it is just still pulling people through virtually every day. So in my estimation, Joe Alexander is a big, big magician who cast a very powerful spell indeed. And I am excited now to jump into it. So let's do it. Finally, we're going to analyze Back to the Future Predicts 9/11. And as is our custom here on Sync Century, we're going to watch it at least half speed. We might even take it down to quarter speed. 0.25x is really my personally preferred speed. I really like to linger in the images, but I do just want to start even just with the fair use logo, or logo, text here that Joe opens with. And I want to say a couple other things about this too. First thing I would just like to say is that it is very, very difficult to be a sync artist. Because it is very hard to find places that will show or tolerate our work in basically any capacity. And that occurs for a number of reasons. One of the reasons that occurs is because people have very, very confused and kind of anxious and uncomfortable feelings sometimes when they see our work, because they're not sure if it's not just work being generated by extremely mentally ill people that, who knows what kind of strange reactions people might have to a piece like this. And I've encountered a lot of this, and I encounter it in various ways. I'm going to give kind of 3 examples here, and so that I don't forget them, I'm going to label them here. What to take first? We'll start with this one, of course, and then probably, just go in reverse order here. So, to begin with the fair use issue, man, we are just facing issues in like very many directions at once as pertains to this problem. First of all, we have the problem of YouTube itself just running a lot of terrible sort of automatic bot processes on video, and these things are searching for patterns that they can then read back to some kind of like we own this sort of idea, so that they can then prevent these things from being seen often. More and more they're just kind of monetizing things, and so that's very, very, very good for us. And I think many of the things we're doing on this channel couldn't have been done on this channel several years ago when this was kind of the more predominant strategy. It does seem that there's been a bit of a shift. And, it just depends on the particular property, though. I still upload videos that sometimes are prevented from being seen. And then I have to throw those videos onto my other space, which is my archive.org channel. And that channel is just way less good than YouTube. Like the player is less good, and also there's just less of an audience there and so on, although I quite love the archive.org as a project. But anyway, it also just creates a situation where my work is kind of split up between a bunch of different locations now. Like I also have some stuff on Vimeo, and it's just like, and that's kind of true for all of us, because it's just this auto copyright detect thing. It really is a chilling thing, particularly for those of us who are really pushing this remix idea into some strange conceptual areas now. Yeah, this is a problem. So it's a problem there in terms of YouTube. It's also just a problem in terms of like, what if we wanted to publish our work someday, Because I think we're doing very important work, at least on some level of analysis, at least just aesthetically, I would say. And so I kind of imagine someday that we ought to have kind of like physically published Blu-ray sets or something of like, the Synchromystic like box set or something, and it should have nice presentation and include all this work, and thinking through what that would demand currently with the rights situation that exists in the world in 2019 moving into 2020. I think it would just be almost impossible, so okay, so that all sucks, and so that's why Joe has to open with this big bunch of text. Particularly because this video, this was published in 2015. So that was a ways ago, and it was a much more chilling climate then than it even is now, I would say. At least that's my memory of it. So okay, we dealt with that one. The next thing I want to talk about is the personal YouTube anecdote. And I'm not going to mention, I don't even remember the username or anything. Basically, sometimes you'll get comments, or it's just like the predictable thing. And we've actually had very, very little of that here, like barely any of it, because just no one's watching. Just generally, though, if you like go on YouTube and like watch a video and then like go down to like this area and start scrolling down, like you'll just see a whole lot of very agitated and kind of insane people fighting with each other down there, basically everywhere that you go. And so, that's just the nature of this machine that we're using currently, and perhaps something about the state of humanity's awareness currently in a global distributed sense. There's just a lot of people that love to pick fights with each other on the internet. And, I say that with total empathy because I used to be a person that picked mini fights on the internet. So, I get it, at least to some extent. But sometimes people are just doing a very particular thing that is very, very harmful, actually. And I want to talk about that a little bit here by way of intro. Sorry to attach a bunch of stuff that doesn't really have anything to do, but in a way it does have to do, because these are all just things that sync artists encounter, I think, all of us. And because this is a big, big work of sync art, I think it makes, and our first analysis of a work of sync art, outside of maybe something like, say, Interstate 60, which you might regard as a piece of very conscious, self-conscious synchronistic art, quite interestingly, for how it connects to Back to the Future, i.e. because it was written and directed by Bob Gale. That's a whole other can of worms. You can watch my sync film, Interstate, if you want to know more about that. So anyway, sometimes people are doing this particular thing. They arrive, and they watch something that you've done, and something in what they're watching catches them in reflection. So here's the person watching, and they see some part of themselves reflected back at them, maybe very starkly and blindingly. And, a very lovely bird has landed on my balcony. Some variety of kestrel, I believe. I'm not sure. Might be a little too small for a kestrel, but it's that kind of look. Owlish. Anyway. They've been coming more frequently, the owls. Or whatever this particular type of bird is. It was gulls previously. Now there seem to be more of these other birds out there. But so they catch a reflection of themselves in the display. And if it is the kind of reflection that is going to elicit this kind of obnoxious response, it's going to be a reflection of an aspect of them that they strongly dislike, or that they have very, very bad negative feelings about in some way, and so that they've repressed quite a bit. And because they've repressed it, they can't relate to it directly. So the only way they can relate to it is through a projective interaction. And it just so happens that screens are very powerful projective tools. This is a thing we don't realize about them yet. They are, in fact, magic mirrors, windows into the psychology, into your unconscious psychology. And so it just so happens that when people interact with displays, they very often are accidentally entering into these very charged alchemical projective loops. And, these poor people, they just have no idea what they're doing, of course. But in this instance, it turned out that this person who left this person just left a comment saying, "You're insane and your perceptions are so insane that you should be very, very embarrassed to share them with the world. And you should shut up and go away," basically, is what this guy said. When I investigated this guy's channel, it turns out this was a person who himself was doing media analysis. He had videos. He was analyzing a particular work of art called Life is Strange, which is this very cool, interesting video game about... I would describe it really as a game about a witch discovering her ability and becoming very quickly involved in a strange, impossible time loop scenario that involves a portal opening and so on. Which is just so similar, you see, to the material we're about to observe in Back to the Future Predicts, and also to the sort of material that I was doing on my channel that this person then had a very bad reaction to. So this person was sitting in their YouTube world, trying to understand this work of art, which was about something that myself and some other people rather believe is true in a much more literal way than this person believes. But I think perhaps wants to believe or something, because he's actually a really smart guy and had many profound and interesting things to say, I thought, about Life is Strange. Very often people seem stuck at this level of kind of literal interpretation of the work of art, where it's all about kind of, figuring out like what actually happened in the plot sequence, Did the plot happen this way or did the plot happen this way? And it becomes very important to kind of iron that out so we can determine what is the canonical flow of events through the film, and I just don't get that, because it seems to me rather more the point is that the work of art has been built in such a way that it allows multiple ambiguous interpretations. So if you want to understand the work of art, you have to do an aggregative thing and understand how all those multiple potential interpretations sum, and also try to understand where the artists have built in those ambiguity points, because perhaps that's significant structure, And so, anyway, that's one example. This kind of thing just kind of happens from time to time. It's people see a scenario that they're struggling with represented back to them in a way that, because I'm just a person who's becoming very comfortable just letting this stuff hang out in the open. I don't care about this kind of thing that much anymore. Well, this whole interaction was like a little proof of that to me, actually, because when this guy came by and tried to ruin my day, I didn't let it. It didn't really impact me that much. Previous interactions I had had impacted me very deeply. People would leave, or people would just say rude things. I've never cared that much about what people say on the internet. It's more like personal friends of mine who tried to sort of gaslight me about my own perceptions and make me feel crazy and do things like that. People like that, unfortunately, I just have no room for in my life anymore. It's too bad because I love some of those people, but oh well. So these are things that we deal with as sync artists because we're doing work that is very aggressively weird, and it's just going to elicit those kinds of responses from people. And so that's why Joe follows up this piece of text with another piece of text. And so this is kind of to address that next problem. We can just read this super fast, and also we're done with this point. Ignotum per ignotius. And gosh, I should know this. Ignorance, leading ignorance or something like that. I'm not sure. I should brush up on my Latin. I never even knew Latin. My dad can answer this sort of question, though. The following is a work of mysticism and sophistry. this is this is just the right thing to say. The insinuations in this piece are not scientific and are not proposed as evidence of an intentional conspiracy by the Back to the Future filmmakers. Now, this is a very important thing to say for a variety of reasons. One is because there is a community of people called the predictive programming community. I'll just list it here as Predictive Programming Community, PPC. And these are folks who are observing the same patterns that we're observing in these films. I mean, they're really paying attention to just the same stuff. And they're interpreting it in more or less just the same way, in that they think, gosh, these little weird things in these movies all seem to point back to 9/11 in some very strange, profound way. Whoops, that was supposed to be a circle. But myself and Joe, we're people who ended up interpreting that in a more magical context or a more spiritual context, or just maybe in a more kind of weird, psychedelic, postmodern context of some sort. I don't want to try to describe Joe's worldview because I'm sure it is very individual and subtle. But it's something more in that domain than in this other domain, which is, in the predictive programming community, a very kind of literal interpretation. They think perhaps there was an intentional conspiracy by the Back to the Future filmmakers, that maybe Bob Zemeckis is himself some kind of a very powerful Illuminati member, ideas like this. And they knew about the attacks, and they put little codes and things into these films that they made as a kind of wink, like evil mastermind sort of, I don't know, weird thing. Or there are other justifications that are offered in this particular interpretation. That perhaps Bob Zemeckis is an occultist, and Back to the Future was a spell that he made to summon 9/11, or maybe along with a bunch of other dark magicians who all made similar spells. And that's actually what all these films are, and so on. But I want to say about the predictive programming community that I relate, actually. I never formed this particular belief, but when I was first looking at the John Carpenter films, I was pretty sure that something special and particular was going on with John, and that he was maybe the biggest magician who had ever lived, and that all this stuff was conscious. He put all these things in the film consciously. Now I don't think that. I think John is just a fantastic artist. John Carpenter is just an amazing artist, and that makes him a kind of de facto magician, or witch, or what have you. And so Spirit was working through him and deposited all these things in these films. That's what I think. But for a time, I thought it was something very different. I thought it was all consciously worked in by John Carpenter. And so then when it intersected with the 9/11 thing, I got very confused. Because now I just didn't, I was just in this kind of space with it. I was like, what the fuck is going on? I couldn't understand yet that maybe there was a subtle unconscious precognitive effect taking place to do with 9/11. And so look, if you're a person who is actually engaging with this data, it is whatever it is. Maybe it is a weird mirage or something, but it's just the case that you can look at certain films in a certain way that really starts to imply 9/11. And the fact that there are like different communities of people, that are all looking at the same material and identifying the same pattern structures in that material and interpreting the material in broadly the same way, i.e. as material that has to do with 9/11, but then arriving at radically different sort of explanations of how that could happen. That, I want to suggest just sort of generally to the world, or anyone who might find this video, is a very, very strong indication that something actually is going on here, okay? At least at the level of a very interesting optical illusion. So that is kind of sucking various people into a vortex, right? So there's something here that ought to be taken very seriously, because things that spread through the information ecology like a vortex can be a little destructive. And so Joe, as not only a very powerful magician, but also a very responsible magician, is, I would describe him as a magician, right? I don't want to know how Joe would think of himself precisely, but I think of him that way. And so I think he's being very responsible here by putting this kind of tag on this thing. It acknowledges that this whole awful situation is existing. So I have to erase it now again. I actually accidentally hit the undo button on my pen. I would love to have a much more sophisticated system someday. The kind of stuff that I drop in as like video quotes, like I have to edit that all in later. I would much rather have a nice, sophisticated neural net-powered pen that would just listen to what I'm saying and drop the quotes in there appropriately as I mention them, or like whenever I draw a bounding box. But anyway, these are things we're going to have to wait probably at least 10 years. Maybe in 10 years we'll have things like that. Joe knows that this is a possibility. He knows that this interpretation is out there, so he wants to say something about it. This piece is not attempting to implicate any specific individuals, because that's very dangerous if you start to suspect that. That's a kind of crazy energy being directed at certain individual people or certain individual groups of people. And I think that's just always pretty bad, because people are individuals and you ought to relate to them as individuals. And I just think that's very primary and important. And I think if you stray too far from that, you're really on a bad path. And apparently Joe thinks that too. So he's, taken the time to set that up for us. At the same time, this is an exploration. He's even bolded that. The principal idea here is we're going to explore of the archetypal relationship that does exist between the narrative of Back to the Future and 9/11 terror events. The correlations uncovered are meant to indicate a conscious connective fabric that ties together. This is now why Joe is a magician. All matter and energy within the universe, producing non-local phenomena which can be referred to as synchronicity. As this fabric is observed by the characters it chronicles, their own stories will appear to reflect the fabric itself. Be cautious. Oh, Joe is such a good magician. There is no message here divisible from this medium. So he's already indicating to you something about that same kind of frame transcendence idea. I just think this is such a brilliant way to open this, because it's the kind of thing that someday might allow the piece to be understood by the folks in scenario 3. First of all, this functions as a little summary of the structure of Joe's film. It's quite brilliant how it does this, really, because it starts off really by saying, here's a conspiracy idea. Then it says, we're just playing a game. We're just going to throw some images and ideas together, and let's not take it too seriously. We're just exploring. So might look like there's a conspiracy, but that's not really what this is about. Let's just have some fun and think for a while. But actually, that's not really what it's about, because actually there is an objective, strange relationship between 9/11 and Back to the Future, if you'll just bear with us, kind of what he's saying there. And look, it points in the direction of real magic in the world. Isn't that amazing? So that's basically the structure of the whole piece, as we'll see as we move through it. And he's giving it to you here just in a very condensed text form, which incidentally is, whoops, I don't want to forget about Tars up here. Incidentally is just itself, I think, a very kind of forward-thinking and very cool idea to sort of provide a condensed version of the total structure of your piece, like a little tiny textual model of the whole thing, like right at the outset of the piece, at the entryway, like that. Neat, Cool move. So anyway, also a useful move, because it provides some context for the piece, which is a thing that is necessary to communicate with people that just aren't ready yet, I guess, to understand this stuff. I don't know. So anyway, the Time Anomaly Research Society is just a group on Facebook. Another sync friend of mine, Alan Green, who is responsible really for pulling together the sync community as it exists, he kind of formed this community more or less by starting these sort of sync summits and publishing the sync books and creating the syncbook.com, in collaboration with folks and all of this. And he recently has returned to the 9/11 synchronicity question and released a film that I shared. We'll put it here. And I shared it with this group on Facebook that claims to be a group investigating time anomalies. And I thought that Alan's wonderful piece, a 9/11 Spider-Verse whatever the actual title of it was, and I'm blanking on it at the moment, unfortunately. It's just this profound piece that connects so many little details about 9/11. It kind of follows the same basic structure as Joe's film here. It's very generous in that it sort of begins with a kind of, here are some strange conspiracy ideas and things you may have heard about 9/11 before, but I'd like to sort of move us, like taking some of that with us and so on, but let's sort of, there is, however, a bigger picture to do with these strange synchronicities about the event. Alan's piece had the same basic structure as this. Just to say, a very generous structure, and I tried to share it with these people, but they really just weren't going to have any of this. But it was just very clear. I mean, it will become clearer to you, probably, if you ever do this kind of work, or find yourself existing in some kind of sympathy or agreement with this kind of work. That generally what happens, especially in group contexts like this, where there's an identity investment. That group is, it's kind of like a public group, and there's a bunch of people there, and those people there all have various anxieties and agitations. And so they're very interested in sort of protecting the credibility or the legitimacy of their ideas according to, how they determine that's going to go or something. I don't know, so I'm throwing away that idea slightly because I'm just bored enough and annoyed enough by it, and I don't really want to talk about it. But they have all these anxieties. And so when you come along with something that's combining 9/11 and synchronicity and conspiracy ideas and all the stuff that we ask people to consider, they're just like, whoa, get that way, 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 way far away from our group, because that's going to make us seem really crazy, more or less. And these people are strange and intelligent people. Obviously, since they're investigating time anomalies, and so they're not gonna they're too aware to just say that to you. So what they're gonna do is and they may not even be aware that that's exactly what's happening to them anyway. And so they're going to invent many stupid rationalizations for why your content can't be on their page. And none of them are really going to make any sense, and you're going to kind of look at those things, and one by one you're going to say, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense, and you can even argue with them. And they might even agree on each point, but then they'll just come up with some new point and say, well, in the end we just don't like it because, or in the end we don't even need to give you a justification. And so in the end they deleted Alan's beautiful video, which in my opinion is probably the only piece of information maybe to flow through that group to contain actual time anomalies in it. They were blinded to it by their own issues, sadly. That's what it boils down to. And so that's why we need to put all this crazy text at the top of our stuff, and that's why if you go back and watch my archives, you'll see that I went through many, many stages of trying to apologize for various aspects of this and try to make it seem less crazy and this and this and this. And, in the end, I think what makes you crazy is doubting the reality of your own perceptions. So I just have to accept my perceptions as what they are. And in my view, this stuff that Joe gets to at the end of his text fragment here and at the end of his piece, there's really something quite profound here. So let's begin the actual piece. So I believe we open with Marty at the cafe in black and white. Is that correct? Yes. What a brilliant shot to open with. Because first of all, it contains already in it the primary tableau. You can see the 9 that makes up that tableau already in the background. It is here next to a pillar and a bunch of signs. Kind of the implication of a clock tower even already. But that's in the background. You're probably not seeing that. However, you might see it because Joe has modified the image to make it a little more visible. He's made the whole thing black and white, which does a couple things. First of all, it instantly lets you know that this is a remix because some process has been done to this. this image already says a lot, because it's also a person sitting here writing a letter. So he's kind of saying, I have something to tell you. And in the end, he's going to have something to tell you about this image, because we're going to get this image again in the piece later, and Joe's going to draw out a profound detail that exists in it. And he's shown you a fragment of that detail already. And so that's really neat, because he's let it sit in the background where it might strike you unconsciously, so that when you then later encounter it in the world, or rather in the piece, you might have the feeling of something coming to consciousness that you had already maybe slightly suspected. So, very nice subliminal engineering here. By way of the quotation, this is, of course, something Zemeckis has done. This is a composition. But Joe has selected this area of the composition to open his piece. He's placed it into black and white, which I think also has the effect of just flattening the whole image, so we might look at the ground a little more strongly.
Dr. Brown, on the night that I go back in time.
And we open with the Apophenia Productions logo. Apophenia Productions is a Vimeo account that Joe Alexander runs, and that he himself and myself and David Plate sometimes release work on. Apophenia is a word that means kind of like false positive perception, seeing things in noisy data that most people would say kind of aren't really there, So like, if you look at tree bark and see a face in there, or if you look at some clouds and you see some kind of funny skeleton head or something, that's something that, I'm just making work for myself, actually. I've edited out all my eating sounds, but that's something that is a projective process, which I would say is revealing objective, unconscious content. Fortunately, people don't quite seem to have that sophistication about it yet, so they rather think that apophenia is a word that means imagining crazy things that don't exist in places where you shouldn't. And Joe knows that, of course, so and knows all the other subtleties about it that I just described. And so he's using that as his sort of handle in the world here. And I think that's super cool. I've eaten enough that I think I can stop eating, so we're all good.
Will be shot by terrorists.
Now we get the title. Sorry, I'm just finishing the pita here. I hope this doesn't seem disrespectful or something. It's rather just like Back to the Future predicts is such a tasty meal. So you can think about it symbolically in that way. This title, I like this. I like the way the text looks. It does situate it in a kind of John F. Kennedy conspiracy video look or feel. It's just similar in a way to the way Radical Rewind opens. There's a slightly political feel to this, but of a clearly kind of conspiratorial sort. It's evocative of like a typewriter look, It does rather remind me of kind of typefaces that we saw used quite a bit in the X-Files and places like that. I like that we have the title of the film in white, and then an actual bisecting line here, and then predicts 9/11 in this gorgeous, devilish red underneath. So he's already telling you that we're about to go underground. And this is a pun that works in multiple ways, because we are literally going to be going into the ground of the image, into the background. And Joe is going to notice for you very many profound details in that background, and then pull them together to make a global interpretation of the film. It is going to be very profound indeed. So, love the title, and I love that we're just continuing to use Back to the Future quotations in black and white. Particularly because black and white is something that can mean print. And so it's already telling you to kind of regard the image as if it were language, which is also highlighted by the writing of the letter, in my opinion. Okay.
Please take whatever precautions are necessary to prevent this terrible disaster.
In the 1985 classic.
So now we get a lot of Joe's narration. I think that for narration, it's probably better to run the thing at normal speed. I do want to call attention to the fact that Joe's kind of making a shine here. You know, he's bringing in some color on this Twin Pines Mall sign because because look at the strange things that are happening on this sign. It's the things that are going on in this picture. So anyway, he's calling your attention to something maybe interesting here.
Back to the Future.
I love this. Is just so cool to me. Like it lights up red like neon, and then we zoom in on it. Like cool effect.
At a scene called the Twin Pines Mall, we will bear witness to a sudden surprise terrorist attack.
So Joe doesn't make much of the Twin Foxes. I think it's just because, you know, how much can you cram into 12 minutes? But anyway, to my mind, this is just an incredible match, you know, and here's the Twin Towers. Here's the terrorist vehicle about to crash into them. It couldn't be more, you know, blatantly, symbolically presented there. But it already has this weird meta aspect because this thing is also it's also a film development booth. It already anticipates that 9/11 is a weird movie that gets broadcast, and maybe already anticipates that 9/11 is going to appear in movies, like in this movie. So you see, there's a weird self-reflexive quality to the way the image comes together here. That's supposed to be an eyeball looking at itself. And Joe draws that out eventually as well. He perceives that meta-looped aspect of it. And I'm going to have a thing to say about the precognitive ring structure at the end of this, probably. But so Joe isn't going to overload you with stuff. He's building a very beautiful documentary-style argument. And so he's beginning with a very simple fact. We have a terrorist attack at a location that is described to us as being about Twin Pines. Joe's going to focus on the Twin Pines. We also have the Twin Foxes. So in fact, there are just multiple ways, multiple simultaneous ways in which this scene is resonating twin energy. Okay.
Perpetrated by a group of Muslim terrorists.
Right, and he wants to tell you specifically, we're dealing with, these are Libyans. So this is about Islamic terrorism in some, at least sort of image space referential way.
The attack is at the...
Great kind of Ken Burns thing there. The one moving in this direction, the other moving in the other direction. It's creates a slightly hypnotic feel there for a moment, actually.
Twin, which is a reference to the Twin Towers.
And so, you know, Joe is forming a correspondence map here. He's just saying, look what this might correspond to. And he's just telling you sort of, it is a reference, which is part of what makes this a little humorous.
When we turn the sign upside down, the digits on the clock read 911.
Yeah, exactly.
9/11.
I kind of don't even have anything to say about these things because it's just I'm just going to be agreeing with every statement. Okay, now Joe is going to show us how the pines map onto the
Twin Pines are a symbolic representation of the Twin Towers. Before the terrorist attack, the twins are present, but after the attack, the twins are gone, replaced with a single pine. This takes place on 9/11, where the twins are destroyed and replaced with a single tower.
Yes. I would also like to say that it's also it's like the most simple map you could form of the individuation process. It's just about the two conjoining and then becoming the pillar. The two are, you know, the sun and the moon. The left and the right hemisphere, or the ego and the unconscious, the living world, the dead world, God, man, etc., etc., etc. So I'm probably not hitting the right ones for the right words there, but it's just some big notion of the human and the other. Something like that. And then you can go through a thing where they fuse, and then you become crazy people like us. But a very integrated sort of crazy person, who might in fact be much more robust and functional than many of the people in the world who think they're not crazy. So just seeding that as a potential idea. And well, isn't it interesting that then 9/11 has that essential structure considered as a symbolic sequence?
The One World Trade Building. Also at this scene, Doc shows us 2 stopwatches, both of which display encoded 9/11s.
Yes. And I love this image. I mean, this to me is such a... how to say about it? It has the feeling already of a religious painting. Look at the pose on the hands. It's hard to describe. I just feel a Christic potency here. Something... I'm tapping into my sort of psychic movie intuitions here now, but I just rather feel that this image is about Christ already. Funny kind of Christ, because there are other weird things going on here, obviously. We have the numeroglyphs, first of all, and of course it's another pair of red things. It's another twin image, and just like the twin red foxes, and it already tells you that it has something to do with time, of course. And look how generous Joe is being, by the way. He's giving you some ways to allow yourself to sit with it and take it a little seriously. Saying, look, I know that it's backwards, It's not exactly 9/11. It's a different number. It's 119. And so he's saying, consider it as if it's just a slightly encoded 9/11. And that's a great way to frame it. These days, I would kind of say, I would almost mount it more as, because I'm more like confrontational maybe now or something, but I would mark it as if you think of it as an image match, it's a perfect correspondent match. It's so, the image structure of these two things are just, it's just point to point to point to point. It's the same thing. It's gonna remind you of this, So I wanted to say about this one, video tools here.
Is this so at this?
Yeah, I wanted to grab this image of Doc here. It's often said about Doc that he's a kind of Merlin magician type. And, well, yes, of course, that's quite obvious. But I've always thought there's something a little sort of gender ambiguous about Doc. He always seems to me rather more like a witch. With this kind of hair style. And then this dog that he is always with, and, that's a Hecate thing. She's always with her hound. So also there's, Hecate is associated with a symbol called Hecate's wheel, which just is quite a bit like both the flux capacitor and like the symbol that then appears on the back of Doc's jacket. Other Hecate things float around him. Well, Hecate is also associated with the triple goddess, which is often visualized like this: crescent moons, and then a full moon in the center, and then, well, this is sort of how the DeLorean logo looks, right? It's really another similar image match. And M, you could even imagine it might stand for moon and so on. Actually, I had a very personal series of synchronicities surrounding this symbol, because I was using parentheses and M like this to designate the unconscious in my personal writings at the time. I had no idea that it was going to link up with both this, I discovered that first, and then eventually this, I discovered that later, and then, wow, it appeared in the context again of a strange Hecate appearance, which was just what was happening to me at the time that I developed this symbol to refer to the unconscious. It was when I was watching In the Mouth of Madness, which is another film loaded with Hecate sort of witch anima energy, in my opinion. So anyway, this is all just to say that when I returned to Joe's film after my sync experiences, I really fell in love with Joe's film in a different way. He
was okay.
He did something quite great here. And so I love that we get this image of Doc. It's a very witchy image of Doc, this particular one. You see him here already with the dog. Of course, it also is a match. Doc is a clear Mr. N type, dressed in white. He holds clocks, which makes him a clock tower. Here's the dog and the vehicle. So this is an inverted match. He even appears with a vertical tower element here. Of course, he has his mouth here and so on. So, bizarrely, this could even be thought to grab some of the structure that we might want to expect in the image there. And so those are also quite nicely diagonalized. strictly speaking, we'd like to see the clocks over here, but we get that wristwatch over here. It's all basically in the bounding space.
2 stopwatches, both of which display encoded 911s. Is this only a coincidence?
And then he asks it as a question, that's great.
Pines are the towers, and this symbol system is confirmed in Back to the Future.
This symbol system, that's cool. To just drop that, it's like a symbol system. What might that be about? To me at the time, that was a very, when I first watched this, in 2015, that was a very provocative phrase. He blows through it kind of quickly, but then just kind of illustrates to you what he means. Gosh, it just is really, it's like every frame of these Zemeckis movies are just so weird. Anyway, like 3 things.
Part 2, where we see the Twin Pines appear again.
Oh, it hurts my brain sometimes, these images. But so Joe's just picked exactly another perfect one of these weird images. And he's picked one that links so nicely in with what he's saying. How to describe this? Video tools, jump backwards again.
And this symbol system is confirmed in Back to the Future Part 2.
Because you start to identify a little bit with Jennifer here, I think. She's confused, like, what? What is going on? And then she has this look kind of, I can't believe it. What am I seeing? And then Joe shows you this miracle.
Pines appear again on a projection.
The Twin Pines appear again on a projection screen. They also appear here again with matchy material.
Movie screen in Marty's future house.
Now Joe highlights it and zooms in on it. I want to say all of this stuff is kind of leaning in the direction of a video analysis aesthetic that might allow us to move into the film in a more 3D kind of way, I can tell what Joe is kind of imagining here, because it's the same thing I imagine. I want kind of a little vessel that can kind of float through these movies and explore them very freely and look at them from any angle. And incidentally, those are tools that will be available to us probably at some point. Neural net supported computer vision is going to allow that kind of extraction. In fact, there are already many amazing systems that aren't even leveraging so much the neural net thing. We're just doing other kinds of complicated, kind of like impromptu photogrammetry techniques and things like that. So anyway, I see Joe already, I see, man, you've got the fever about it. You've already got the vision for the need to live in these movies in a deeper way,
Marty's family gathers
and we get more of that here. Now Joe places us into a kind of cool holodeck situation. He's going to highlight different characters and do all kinds of neat sort of visual tricks to show you how this image works together. And wow, it works together. It's a very strange image indeed.
Around the movie screen, and the Twin Pines actually morph into the Twin Towers. This is because the Twin Pines are the Twin Towers. The Pines are the towers.
Incidentally, for anyone who watched my explanation of Radical Rewind, spoiler edition of it, I mentioned how in Hellraiser 3 there's just an exact similar thing. There's a placement of the literal Twin Towers right next to a symbolic representation of the 9/11 scene. And they just cut into one another. So, well, here they are again in another film. Just those two things sitting right exactly next to each other somehow.
Pines, Towers. And the Twin Pines Mall is the Twin Towers Mall, which is why all the clocks here secretly say 9/11 and why there will be a Muslim terrorist attack resulting in the destruction of the Twin Pines.
This is so great, the repetition, It's funny, but it's also quite necessary because Joe is asking you to add up a bunch of little pieces in your head and understand how they all point back to the same thing in a very impossible way. And that's a bit of a synthetic operation, not so much a sort of reductive analytical operation. You're not going to break a thing apart and then analyze its details. You're going to look at some details that you don't know what they are yet and see how they might form a coherent whole, So that's just part of the nature of this work. You have to sometimes be very, very repetitive and say the same things over and over and over and over and over again. And I do quite a lot of that as well. And Jung did quite a lot of that as well. And actually talks in a certain passage about the problems of this, that it's just very hard to talk about or teach synchronicity. It involves high-dimensional point correspondence and keeping many trans-contextual variables together in your head at the same time, and well, it's just a bit of a task, isn't it? So Joe's really trying his best to lead his audience through these winding pathways here.
Or the Twin Towers. But the appearance of the towers is not a random backdrop, as we can see the Statue of Liberty lurking just as secretly as the towers, making this scene a secret recreation of New York City.
So you see what he's done. He's saying, look, there are multiple points aligned simultaneously. Perhaps that's significant. Perhaps that's evidence that something really is occurring. But now Joe is really going to go the extra mile and interpret this as an instruction, as if this entire thing were a puzzle. And that's something that, yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, this is really an aspect of it. It's just as if it has been constructed as a puzzle. So that's a very serious thing about it, I would say. And kind of the scary thing about it. It implies something really, maybe very profoundly strange about it. I mean, look, of course, we are solving it like a puzzle, so maybe that's just what's reflected back to us in a much more loopy way. Oh, it's hard to say. Sorry, I'm stretching. I'm still waking up here in the morning.
Gathered to stare at Ground Zero. Of these three characters,
look at this. I just think this is so cool.
Staring at Ground Zero, one of them is completely...
He flashes George over there. That's so neat. It's like, if only, movie players would just allow you to do things like this. I would love to just highlight arbitrary elements and sort of spin them around like a wheel like that. And yeah, a wheel, as if there were kind of an arrow in the middle here, and you set it spinning, and it's going to land on George or something, So Joe is going to land on George, who's upside down, of course, in this scene. And Joe's going to interpret that as a clue. Here we go.
Down. But in the entire Back to the Future saga, this is the only time when an upside-down character will ever appear. The hint being given here is to observe the scene from his perspective by turning it upside down. But when doing so, the Twin Towers are clearly shown to be falling down.
So you'll notice here that this is also very similar to the material in Hellraiser 3, because as you might recall, as we continue to rewind that sequence from so in my film, it sort of begins with the symbolic the symbolic match, a symbolic structural match. Then we get the actual image of 9/11, and then we get the Pepsi cans that are handed with red on this side and so on. Sorry, for people who might be jumping into this analysis that are here because Back to the Future Predicts and you know really nothing about my work, I'm just another person engaged in the 9/11 synchronicity question, and I've developed a lot of jargon to talk about this kind of total picture match, like 9/11 myth image idea that I think I'm seeing in a lot of films. So I'm just kind of branching into that momentarily here. But basically, those Pepsi cans, if you watch them in reverse, they appear to be falling down. So it's just really quite a similar idea to this. So I don't know. I find it's interesting to me to note those similarities, because of course, Joe and I are different people with different brains. But we found just incredibly identical structures in a very high-dimensional way in two very different films that, as far as anyone knows, shouldn't have anything to do with each other and shouldn't have anything to do with 9/11. And so things like this are just really rather bizarre to note and perceive. And so we're people that feel compelled to make films about that because we're just so impressed by what it is that we're seeing. Okay, moving on with the analysis.
In the entire history of cinema...
This line is so great because it is... What can I say about it? It's probably literally not true. Which is funny because I think he says the word literal here, but it's the way, like, figuratively true. I'll let him finish the thought.
This scene of Back to the Future is the most literal depiction ever made showing the Twin Towers falling down.
The literal image of them is literally moving in a downwardly direction of the frame, you see? So I think this is just a hilarious joke in so many ways. And it needs it here because he's asked you to consider something that for most people is probably going to be so bizarre. And he's made a joke here that actually allows you to laugh at his expense a little bit, because you might think that he doesn't mean that in a humorous way or something. But of course there is a meta joke, which is he also means it in a very serious way. And so anyway, welcome to Sync. It really is that laughing, crying, weird duality thing all the time. It just always has the quality of a joke. And we don't know really if we believe it or if we don't, or at what level we do or if we don't. That's just all kind of part of the miracle of it, I suppose. But I love this part of the film. This is one of my favorite parts.
So how is it possible that this scene would occur in a story that already contains a terrorist attack by Muslims at the Twins on 9/11, which then execute Hollywood's best depiction of the Twin Towers?
See, that I really would agree with. This is truly one of Hollywood's best depictions. It's depicting it in a very strange way, but a lot of stuff comes together in this film franchise and in this particular moment, this particular scene in Back to the Future Part 2, that, in my opinion, like, as someone who interprets art in this way, makes this one of the most poignant and strange expressions of 9/11 that we've ever received in an artistic production. I really take that pretty seriously. So... yeah, what an amazing moment in this film, in Back to the Future Predicts. I love this.
Collapse. But Back to the Future doesn't just portray this attack, it develops into an elaborate warning about it.
Okay, so now Joe is moving into the second ring. We've been in the first sort of precognitive ring, which is, here's a film that seems to have somehow received reflections of this very powerful, traumatic image that a million bajillion people watched at the same time. And this film seems like it has little funny impressions of things kind of in the details where people aren't used to looking, like in the margins of the edit, as it were. And in those liminal spaces, it's like there's all these little things that seem like they just are being organized by this image and this idea and these concepts. And so, okay, we've been looking at that. That's the first ring. But then there's a second ring, which is that the film also seems to already anticipate that someday the first ring will be perceived. And that that's going to be somehow very significant. And that that's going to, in fact, be a kind of major moment of spiritual growth for humanity as a whole, perhaps. That's kind of already implied in the mythic structure of Back to the Future. No backups for a long time. That's rather alarming. Oh well. Hey, that's like the symbol I drew there, eh? It's kind of a backwards time symbol. But anyway, we're moving into the second ring, and in the second ring, we're now going to encounter this strange kind of area where it's almost the film itself seems to become aware of itself as a film that contains precognitive information that will someday be seen. Or understood. Received. The message will someday be received. So Joe's going to draw that out for us here.
Just go back early and warn him. Doc, about the future. We will be shot by terrorists.
But Marty is carrying more essential information about the future. He knows the exact time and date that a tower will be struck.
Save the clock tower!
Here's another Hecate idea, by the way. There's kind of some witchy energy here, appearing along with the third eye and all this, which Joe will call our attention to momentarily.
Save the clock tower! Don't forget to take a flyer.
In a story we already suspect of being a 9/11 warning, how is it possible that this phrase appears on a...
See, I would say that this image is very directly related. It grabs the image structure already. It has an antenna, you see? It has an antenna, and then it has this weird clock right where we might expect to see the North Tower wound, which I always argue on this channel broadly has the shape of a pair of kind of pyramidical sunglasses. But because of the way the building is organized, and because of the smoke and stuff that's happening over here, it means that this extra pyramid is a little de-emphasized in the image, which means there's a kind of an ambiguity in the image that can be interpreted in multiple ways. It's like, which direction is this cube facing, you know? Are we reading this as this, or just as this? Because if we're just reading it as this, then it's this. You see, those are clock hands. And so the 9/11 image itself already just has the very basic look of something kind of like this, which is just very close to the look of this tower, that then also receives two black dogs. That's the other aspect of the Hecate image space here. We don't just get a witch, i.e. a kind of like crone archetype image type, along with a third eye in a pyramid that actually says third eye. We also get twin black dogs at the top of the tower, which might also remind you of this Gozer stuff that appears in Ghostbusters, which is also a film about a big explosion at a building in New York City. So you see how strange the referential terrain is around these films. It is really a deep rabbit hole. And, yeah. So back to the film.
A flyer telling the future. Then, when the tower strike takes place, a giant flaming 9/11 is ignited in the street.
Exactly. So here's the big tableau that also, I would like to say, contains a kind of a vehicle on fire on the same side of the image that we would expect to see it in the 9/11 image. And then also has a pillar over here. And then also this is where the clock tower actually goes, up here. So this is like the big North Tower side, you see? Then over here with all the fire and the thing that actually says 9/11, and also the movie theater that has the twin rectangles in it, that is The Atomic Kid, which is a movie about two actors that both have red hair that then kiss in some kind of weird psychic power scenario. With the flaming vehicle and all of this in this image, the whole thing constitutes a giant 9/11 image match, actually. A 9/11 image match that signs itself with a statement of the date in flames next to a vehicle in fire by way of figure ground compression. I mean, there are astrological signatures here as well. I don't have time to go into these things. Pluto, Sagittarius, Gemini. Doc eventually enters this tableau and becomes Saturn. That's another way of expressing the 9/11 date, because it occurred on the Saturn return of the Twin Towers construction. Okay.
Marty knows exactly when and where this tower strike.
It's a religious picture to me, so I get in a mode when I see it. It just it ought to be in a museum. That's kind of my energy about it.
It will happen because it's all written on this flyer and placed in his hands, but something lurks in the background overseeing this transaction.
Such a great insight. I don't know how it is that I managed to watch this movie so many times. This was one of the movies I watched as a kid, over and over and over again. I built time machines out of cardboard and pretended to be Doc. And, well, I never saw the third eye back there, Joe found that and pointed that out to me, and I just was amazed, because it's really objectively weird. This is a set, This is something Zemeckis has chosen to put here. What the fuck is Zemeckis up to sometimes? He's a very strange filmmaker.
The symbol hover while Marty is forewarned about the tower strike. Back to the Future was written and directed by Robert Zemeckis, first released in 1985, but to depict the future, Zemeckis chose October 2015.
Hi, Doc, what's going on, huh? Where are we? When are we?
Okay. he say it here?
October 21st.
Here I want to talk about what I perceive, which I think is a third ring. We have the precognitive material itself. We have the self-referentiality of the film as precognitive object, apprehended at some point in the future. So there's kind of a story built into these films that is talking about someone watching a movie and understanding, seeing precognitive material, which I've just realized here really is one way we might interpret the 9/11 image globally, if we think of the atomic kid as the precognitive material and the North Tower as the observer. So you see the ring is already contained in the image itself, in the event itself. But anyway, I see, and I'm sure Joe also sees, this third ring, which is that those of us who have already been doing this because we're synkheads and we're looking at movies and we are seeing these things, so we're fulfilling the prophecy, if you like, of what seems to already be suggested by the films. We seem to now be contained in the films already because this is one day before my birthday. And I'm sorry, but that just weirds me out. And it weirds me out that Christopher Lloyd, the actor that plays Doc, shares my birthday. So Doc is also Christopher Lloyd is also on October 22nd. And I think I've mentioned before that this birthday, it also appears in Donnie Darko, which is a film that really seems to describe aspects of my life in a very strange way sometimes. And it's also a film that was literally kind of like the first date. This person that I then spent a tremendously long time with in my life, a 13-year-long relationship. So this whole film is very personal to me, but then it also is a film that is involved in this 9/11 precognition stuff in a quite, in my opinion, objective and obvious way. So I just feel that, other things like this, like Uncle Joey in this film, I really think that, in Back to the Future, that is, I really think Uncle Joey somehow, I think that it's like, this is me being maybe a little nuts or something, but I just see like little references to Joe in Back to the Future and in other 9/11 precognitive films sometimes. And I see things that seem like little references back to me as well. Just weird things like that. So I wonder if we haven't also become caught in the global precognitive sort of spiral process now. And so there's just this very faint sort of third rung that contains information about the early discoverers as individuals. Okay, well, with that one I just have to laugh because I can't really take things like that too seriously, or I just can't get along with the space-time node in which I happen to be living. People in this time would really regard that sort of thing as most people as a hard delusion of reference. And I would say for myself that I don't really know what I think about it. I just know that I can't help but perceive these details that do seem to gesture back towards myself and some of my friends quite personally. So that's either something real or it's just a word of caution to people that might get sort of lost in a symbol trip or something. It can get that weird. Yeah, you might see yourself really reflected in these things. So, okay. Move forward.
2015. 2015?
The Twin Towers scene takes place in October 2015, and the towers appear on a movie screen, meaning the McFly family is watching a secretly placed Twin Towers movie released on October 2015, directed by Robert Zemeckis. So how could it be that now, in the real October 2015, a major Hollywood production...
It's just almost too weird for words, this stuff. I don't know. I think maybe you're just a person who's attuned to authentic weirdness, or you aren't. I think a lot of people laugh and mock this stuff because it's just It's too weird to sit with. And because it can be dismissed, because you can just very easily say, the fuck are you crazy people talking about? People, this character dressed in a red shirt, this other character dressed in a red shirt, these two movies, the distance of time between, it's not anything. None of that's anything. It's just a bunch of bits that don't add up to anything. And it's just hard to know what to say because, okay, we just have to agree to disagree because for us, the bits just add up to something. They just do add up to something in our head. And they're adding up to something so profound in our heads that we can't sort of keep it inside of our heads. So we have to make these sync video art pieces about them. That's a very different kind of art, folks. I'd just like to say that's a genuine kind of authentic religious art. It's always born out of that kind of suffering. There's a vision coming through somehow. And yeah, maybe it's all this 9/11 stuff. Maybe that's an accident or... I don't believe that, but maybe it's an accident or some kind of... It's a weird thing, but there's also something else going on here. There's something very deep and true about a shift in the way we relate to images and time and understanding and meaning. And it is profound, in my opinion.
Is about to hit theaters worldwide, and it is exclusively about the Twin Towers. It happens to be directed by Robert Zemeckis. The title of this new Twin Towers film is The Walk, and this new Twin Towers film has the exact same release date as the secret Twin Towers film Planted in Back to the Future, which exposes the symbolism of the pines and depicts the Twin Towers collapse. So why would Zemeckis now draw our attention to it with a
It's such a good movie. I can't get through Back to the Future Predicts without at least one or two crazy sync laughs.
Major Hollywood production. Back to the Future was released in 1985. The Walk...
Oh, God, he's going to make us look at it as a timeline graph, too.
2018, exposing this warning after 30 years.
And so now he's looped us, it's very cool formally. He's looped us back around to the very first image he gave us. But now we're in color. Because here's the message, here's the reveal now. And now we know what's in the background. So we've come back around to a scene with a much deeper understanding of it now, maybe. I think that's so cool.
Marty writes this warning into a letter. He seals it shut, intending for it to remain hidden for a specific amount of time.
What's the meaning of this? Find out in 30 years! What's the meaning of this?
There it is. Just one of the most beautiful matches with the twin red streaks. The vehicle on that side. Marty with his visor and with his clock, so he becomes the clock tower. The antenna doesn't appear in the correct location precisely, but we get antenna-like things here in the form of the telephone poles. I'm just sighing because, I don't know, how do people look at this image and not see that it's an image of 9/11? Obviously an image of 9/11. It's like a beautiful symbolic painting about 9/11 that also includes in it like the idea that it's going to reveal to us something profound about time and details, because he's kind of looking at numbers on a clock, Such a beautiful image, and it works perfectly as a globally bisected handed match with the blue and the black up here. You can almost see the smoke line there. So.
Find out 30 years!
And then in 30 years, what does Zemeckis give us? But a literal image of the Twin Towers that also has a kind of implied Christ idea here, with Philippe Petit balancing poles between the hemispheres on the corpus callosum or something.
The Walk is the reveal of the 9/11 warning given to Doc while he is rigging a giant wire to the Twin Tower representing Clock Tower.
Evening, Dr. Brown. What's with the wire?
The Walk is about a plot to rig a giant wire to the Twin Towers.
Sorry. Oh yeah.
So Marty records the warning while
It hurts, man. It's like, this is the part of the song, like, if this was like a psychedelic rock song, this is the part where the guitar solo is just like shredding your brain with fast, formal invention and brilliant technique, and like, there's just all this information aligning now in this thing. It's like clicking into place in your head. And the way that Joe is escalating the frequency in which he's cutting between the images, and it's just, it really speaks to the experience. And that's a very hard thing to do, to represent it's actually kind of a very old, but a very alien and strange kind of cognition, and to try to actually represent something about what it feels like to have these realizations in the structure of your film. That is super cool, impressive stuff. And to my mind, makes this just a tremendous art film by any metric, pretty much.
Doc is rigging the wire to the tower. Marty tells Doc he will understand the warning in 30 years.
Find out in 30 years.
30 years later, the director makes a movie about rigging a wire to a tower, the Twin Towers, because the warning within Marty's letter is about a terrorist attack at the Twin Towers.
What's with the wire? What's with...
I have to say, Joe has rather constructed a kind of accidental match here. Here's the atomic kid on the correct side. Here's Doc with the clock. So this is a big Mr. N Tower concept. This is an atomic kid explosion concept, and here they are correctly handed, correctly bisected.
What's with the wire?
After rigging this wire, the tower strike takes place, and a Marty McFly from the future runs out onto the scene. He has just time traveled here from October to...
I'll say it at the right moment.
2015, the release date of The Walk.
Uh-huh.
But in The Walk,
God.
standing on top of the Twin Towers, is Marty McFly.
So you see, Joe does already have the significance of the twin foxes. Here they are. If we consider this as Michael J. Fox, and that this is some weird clone of Michael J. Fox, then that's Fox number 1, and that's Fox number 2, and they're both in red. And here they are in front of the movie theater, which is just like the film booth. So the primary symbolic expression, in my opinion, that what I call the signature, is in fact represented in this piece in the ground. Quite beautifully and quite strongly. What a beautiful frame Joe's given us here. Gosh. Can you do a goofy gorsh about it? I don't know. But I love this part. Good
This
moment.
Marty
More or
is
less right at the middle of the film. Look at that. This bisecting line here almost catches our, that's interesting.
Here from the exact date where this Marty is standing. The plot of The Walk is the tower wire rigging event that just took place at this scene. One Marty is standing on top of the Twin Towers, while the other Marty stands inside a giant flaming 9/11 in the wake of a tower strike. While simultaneously across town, another Marty witnesses a terrorist attack take place at the Twins, which are actually the Twin Towers, a fact we learned from the secretly placed Twin Towers movie released on October 2015. This movie is actually The Walk, which is why it has Marty McFly standing on top of the Twin Towers.
What's the meaning of this?
Bringing that quote back there,
Wire.
so cool.
What's with the wire?
I love now Joe uses all this material. It's kind of like vertigo shots. So all of these like zooms and kind of like just this like staring down at this kind of abyssic thing. Like it's going to give you a little bit of a almost queasy feeling, which is how it feels in real life often when a synchronicity occurs that really hits you. It'll knock the wind out of you a little bit. You might get a little nauseous. It really can be that physical, at least for me.
Find out in 30 years.
I love what the music does here. Da 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 da, or whatever the phrase is. It's hitting. It becomes somehow something very, I don't know, tender is occurring here. Hard to describe.
Doc! It's me, it's Marty.
No, it can't be. Just sent you back to the future.
Oh, I know you did send me back to the future, but I'm back. I'm back from the future.
Gosh.
Great Scott.
So perfect. Just perfectly executed, in my opinion. And then that image. I just love that, of the head surrounded by static. This is a cool idea. I love this head in silhouette watching the television image.
More human minds on planet Earth observed 9/11 than any single event in human history.
Okay, so now Joe is going to offer us a theory. And he's going to offer us a pretty nuanced and interesting magical theory of how these films might have been made in the way that they appear to have been made. So I'll just let him articulate the argument here, because he does a perfect job.
Making it a massive terrestrial meditation, concentrating collective consciousness onto a single space-time focal point, making 9/11 humanity's most potent consciousness-altering stargate. Zemeckis, a precogging conduit, channels the 9/11 archetype with his Tower Strike Twin Pines terror attack cinematic superimposition, both scenes featuring the transdimensional portal, pointing to 9/11 as the archetype of...
I just have to pause it. He's about to say, pointing to 9/11 as the archetype of transcendence. This image, I just love it. I don't know. It's the Stargate portal, you know. This is one of the moments in this film, I think, that this really got to me somehow. I couldn't explain it yet, but I knew that something profound was being said here just in the picture. 9/11 is really a kind of portal. And people ought to think about that a little more seriously, maybe.
Transcendence. The consciousness portal is opened by touching the 2001 monolith, the movie screen, as touching the two-dimensional screen dispels its three-dimensional guise, revealing how the images it portrayed were not actually real.
Okay, so now we're bridging into some other interesting stuff that we'll have to think about a little bit. But I want to say, before we move into this next half of the argument, actually I'm going to back up a little bit for it. Oh, this is great. Just drawing the monolith. So Joe's given you an idea that maybe what happened was there was this big event. So this is 9/11 happening. And for the first time in history, this was an event with a literalized cloud of witness. Because we just had millions and millions of people watching that occur as it occurred. It's just a bunch of minds entrained to the same image. Same patterns are flowing through their psyches at just the same moment. See, it is a kind of flux capacitor idea. And Hecate is associated with precognitive visions, actually, and things like that. So it makes sense. I think it is a kind of past, present, future combined in the middle concept, but I think it's also about how minds are connected in the center. And so anyway, somehow they're all watching this thing, and somehow that creates like a big wave that then dumped, sort of like discharged pieces of that energy into the minds, the unconscious minds of creative people like Robert Zemeckis, who was just making a movie. He was just making a movie in the 80s. This is a thing that happened in 2001. And so somehow something very funny in the matter is going on with time. Or something. Because now we're just in a space where there's not much left to say. It's like, okay, well that's a very interesting way to think about it. That is my kind of default way of thinking about it. However, I never really feel like I have any idea, really, how this might have happened. Because maybe it's different. Maybe it's more that 9/11 was summoned into existence in a much more causative, magical kind of way, you know? So anyway, let me sketch an alternative view. Maybe human beings are all witches. Or magicians, or however you would like to conceptualize this. but they're all doing magic, especially when they make art. It's just that they don't know what they're doing. But so human beings think they're making art, but actually they're making spells. And so stories and images are spells, and films are like really hyper, like amped up, like technologically assisted, like mega spells or something. So maybe they're actually really potent spells. Because it's also then like millions of people watch those movies, and they become part of the fabric of our dreams and so on. So I'm just thinking here, like, let's think in a magical worldview, and let's say that magic goes on and these kinds of things happen, and, this would be quite an issue then in that kind of world, right? It would be like people very naively creating spells that, it's like maybe you don't know exactly what you're going to get. So people are making these spells, and they're making all these films that are about something, but people don't know what they're about, and they're actually what they're doing is it's much more directly somehow that the fantasy that we meditate on and the libido that we put into those fantasies summons a historical response. In other words, perhaps it's like what Ray says at the end of Ghostbusters.
I couldn't help it.
It just popped in there. The notion there being, is the Gozerian kind of choose the form of the destructor.
I tried to think. Look!
Doesn't matter to Gozer, i.e. maybe to Heki, i.e. maybe to this part of the collective human mind that is responsible for things like precognition and other funny business to do with dreams and magic. Maybe that's just a metaphorical way of thinking about it. Maybe what we're actually talking about is a systems process running in the psyche, which is just a non-local organ that's maybe kind of entrained to its own future state in an entanglement kind of way or something. Like, look, there are many, many ways that we could think about what's going on here, but I prefer this magical, mythic kind of stuff because I think it just rather gets more to the point. So yeah, maybe we summoned 9/11 accidentally. And all of the weird, we got something that fit the shape of all these perfect little details because we just needed something to do that. Sorry, this is a hard and subtle one to explain. I feel like I'm not doing a good job, and also that I'm now trampling a little bit on Joe's piece, by sort of injecting my own weird half-baked theories about it. Because I think Joe's view is much more, or I don't even know if that's Joe's view. It's a view that he's chosen to place in this film, a kind of Kotzian view, let's say, for some reason. I think it's a very good theory and a much more elegant one than the one that I'm kind of imagining or advancing. It's just that certain things in my synchronicity life seem to imply to me that I'm willing certain things into existence in a more direct way. I don't know. Maybe that is my little weirdness taking hold there, but point is just that it's ambiguous. This synchronicity thing is ambiguous. It really is it's Jung's word for just weird magical stuff that has to do with the psyche, maybe in some way, So, yeah. Okay. So that's all that. Now we're bridging into a second thing, where Joe is now going to talk about a more kind of a higher zoom on this stuff. Joe's going to talk more generally kind of about information and understanding and exploration of information and how technology is amplifying and changing that for us now. And again, I think I'll just kind of throw it to Joe here because it's hard to put this stuff more succinctly than he puts it. That's part of the mastery of the piece, is he's really condensed tremendously complex ideas into very friendly, but also provocative and humorous and interesting and concise forms. And that's a lot of things at once.
Its three-dimensional guise, revealing how the images it portrayed were not actually real.
One of those that use so many names that you forget your own.
To touch the monolith is to be freed from the fabricated narrative portrayed on the screen or by film, finally seeing the illusion employed to paint audience perspective into a box. The screen as the 2001 monolith is present on Ground Zero in the form of the Millennium Hilton Hotel, which was intentionally built to mimic the 2001 monolith, the movie screen. Humanity's mass tuning into the 9/11 event was the collective.
Sorry, just like snickering, like, yes, this is all true information. Look it up if you don't believe it.
Touching of the monolith, where enslaved minds in mass began rejecting the narrative of their controllers.
So here he's kind of tying it back into a slight kind of conspiracy like tone again, And also I think this is true, 9/11 really did do this. I'm not someone who's like entirely outside of the conspiracy culture or whatever. I take conspiracy theories seriously, the ones that I think are serious or whatever. I was one who took seriously the notion that the government was probably spying on us and all those kinds of things when it was unpopular to think that. And hey, guess what? That's really real. So lots of other things like that I think are real. And I'm someone, I went through the whole research tunnels with MK Ultra and all that kind of stuff in my teen years, and found that stuff all very fascinating and convincing. And so my attitude is that conspiratorial things are going on all the time, all over the place. I just think there's a lot of corruption and collaborating in a corrupt context, So, and I think there's really no end to the darkness and terrors that human beings will produce when they have, when they're completely, or they feel anyway, completely hidden, and like there's no chance that they're ever going to be caught for anything that they're doing, and they have big institutional structures and things that are providing with a lot of power and support and cover and so on. I just think it gets really, really bad indeed. So to me, it is not really so far-fetched of an idea that the American government may have been more actively involved in 9/11 in some way. I don't personally know very much about that question, but I do know that whatever was going on with the event, it's an event that marked a shift in the sophistication with which we relate to images. That's just all been happening at the same time. It just exists in the same era of history that then very shortly produces the iPhone and sort of the mature video internet as it's now developing. So it also is timed, by the way, with an explosion of archetypal material in Western and particularly American cinema. Because Spider-Man is like the first big superhero, sort of modern superhero reboot movie thing that spawns the whole wave of stuff that then descends into Infinity War and all the stuff that's going on right now in all these different universes. It really launches that wave of American material. And that happened in precise synchrony with the 9/11 event. And in fact, that film is a film that was then kind of immediately censored in various ways to remove references to 9/11. Or kind of apparent, weird potential references to 9/11, even just kind of in the trailer. I don't know how much stuff was removed from the actual film, but anyway, it's all just very... That's great. It's Carol Ann here. It's all just very synchronized from the beginning in a very conspicuous way. And so I'm not a person who would say that there isn't a literal conspiracy element, and that the story of 9/11 isn't going to ultimately be about Americans holding their government to a greater account in some way in the end. That probably is a very significant aspect of it, but I believe there's also this paranormal aspect. To me, the big image is still the twins in front of the portal. That's it. So...
Tune in to 9/11 was to touch the screen and finally see the illusion opening the portal of transcendence. As Marty opens this portal during the 9/11 scene splice amalgamation, he makes contact with the illusion by
scene splice amalgamation. I mean, people should have been more impressed by this. It annoys me a bit. By the way, this is a gorgeous match. I'm going to mark it up as we talk. I did the higher ed thing, and they teach cinema studies in a particular way. And I wasn't in like a cinema program or anything, but I took some classes that involved that. And I worked with people who were in those programs on their student films and things. And, it's just very, very simple and basic. And also there's just a thing about, there's universities, which is that they are very afraid of controversy, typically, because you have these professors that are all sort of vying for sort of like status positions and so on, and it just gets very stupid, and people are afraid to take intellectual risks, and it's just the way that it is. But unfortunately, I think that sync art is pitched in a way that is currently just very, very in between. It's far too sophisticated in terms of what it's sort of asking people to understand about just sort of how movies work and how visual information works and how art works and so on, to be accessible to kind of a general internet video audience. It's just like, what are we fucking talking about here? Scene splice amalgamations and all this stuff. These are complicated things probably to people who haven't ever thought about movies as art and the apparatus of cinema and things like this. I mean, these things aren't so complicated, but it's just more of a familiarity thing. It's just like, we don't really teach art appreciation very well, even in school. So that's the other thing. It's actually rather too sophisticated even for like university programs, just in terms of the subtlety of the ideas sometimes. But then even in addition to all that, then it has this sort of insane madness, like crazy conspiracy sort of like aspect going on to it, which universities, because they're all about preserving their intellectual credibility in all of this, they're just ridiculous institutions that need to go away, really. Sorry, I'm a bit bitter about them. I wanted to do real thinking there and just found it so difficult. You had to just fight so hard to do anything even remotely ambitious or creative there. They just sort of wanted mediocrity out of you or something, and it just yikes. But anyway, it just means that we're doing very excellent work that hasn't found its audience yet, because no one understands what we're doing yet. So sorry to break it to everybody. We all know this, of course. It's just, the way that it is with this kind of stuff. You want to do cutting edge work, it's just going to take a while. At least we've got each other, man. We all see, all the sync artists see what we're all doing and can appreciate each other's work. And so anyway, that was a big part of this, motivating me to do this new sort of sync series. I just want to appreciate everybody's great work because I love it, basically. So now we're racing towards the Twin Pines, Twin Foxes, Twin Photo Booths, Twin 88s, sort of globally matched clock radio idea here, while Joe continues to narrate his ideas.
Film via the film booth at the exact moment the portal opens.
Yes, there it is. So he even draws a circle around it. I haven't asked Joe what he thinks about the foxes specifically. I just know that he definitely gestures towards them very strongly in multiple beautiful ways in this piece, but only in the imagery. He never mentions the foxes. He just points you towards them. And that's a great magician move as well. I love to talk about this stuff, obviously, so I'm talking about this whole piece, but it's also good to sometimes just let things, I don't mention every little thing about Radical Rewind. There's a lot of other weird stuff in that piece. And there's a lot of other weird stuff in this piece. So, sometimes it's good to just leave things unsaid. But
by touching film via the movie theater.
He pulls this out as well. I mean, this is a very important image, of course. There's the Atomic Kid idea right there.
At the exact moment the portal opens.
Yes.
Again to open the portal.
Again. And then this is the best insight. I love this one.
Marty must touch film via the movie screen at the exact moment the portal opens. Touching the screen, dispelling the illusion, opening the portal while enacting the 9/11 archetype. The screen finally becoming the creator of the fabricated images.
Did you catch that? Are people insane enough to catch what I caught there? Let's jump backwards. And now I do want to take it slow so we can kind of see what Joe's doing here a little bit.
Finally becoming the creator.
Right? We had a man in a red hat, and then immediately we have a red head, juxtaposed on top of buildings.
Of the fabricated images.
I wonder if Joe grabbed this from an Apple commercial or where he got this material. Were those just things that were in the material, maybe? So great that we get a 137 here. This relates, of course, to the fine structure constant. It's a number that Jung and Wolfgang Pauli were very obsessed with, and there's a cool book about all that. It's kind of like one of the sort of like patron saint numbers of synchronicity, which I find so interesting. Then that this is almost like a visual like 2, because we have like 1 and 1, and so this 137 is this number, but 1 over 137, that's the fine structure constant, I think. And so it almost becomes like a 237, right? He puts his own film into his own film. It's just fantastic move.
Film instigated ascension is the same as the 9/11 ascension. A message that discredits the medium which carries it.
So, I don't know if this is fair, and maybe this reflects my own biases here or something. And we're about to move into a very nice kind of image-carried denouement here. But I rather think there's a slight kind of contraction that happens right at the end of this piece. Kind of we start with this kind of stuff, and we're kind of getting increasingly cosmic as we move through. Then there's this huge area where it's like, oh gosh, all these insane ideas about 9/11 and the walk and the multiple Martys and all of this stuff coming together. And then we're talking about terrestrial meditations and, consciousness synchronizing ideas. And we're getting very, very magical worlds very quickly. And then instead of ending with that, it seems that Joe kind of deliberately pulls it back down into some slightly more earthly ideas at the end, very interesting ideas and use and probably quite true ideas and so on, and very relevant ideas. But I feel that it does give the viewer a bit of an escape at the end. It allows the viewer to say, oh, okay, I see. This is really a piece about skepticism and not taking things too seriously. And look, he's shown us his own movie, so he's telling us that this is just, we're just having a laugh here at the end of the day. And of course, that's sort of true in a certain sense. That's just a thing about this synchronicity thing. You have to hold that kind of space for it. You have to be ready to throw the whole thing in the garbage, because it's, it's weird. But there's also an aspect of it that eventually kind of can't be thrown into the garbage anymore, and that's the ways in which it changed you. Because those are just facts that you will have to learn to live with. And so this is, I think, another instance of Joe being a very responsible magician. He doesn't want to make a piece that leaves you stunned and confused in a negative way. So he's walked a very delicate wire, a very delicate tightrope. And has given you a piece that can be related to in many ways at once. And he's given you a kind of final statement that will allow you to walk away from the piece with your reality intact, if more or less, if you'd like to. That also isn't just a kind of consolation prize either. It's going to give you some real wisdom there about images and skepticism and narratives, and those are all very astute observations. But it's not going to insist that you integrate the intense cosmic ideas that it was giving you just moments prior. And I think that makes for a very interesting tone overall in this piece. And there's an aspect of it that I love very dearly, because it allows me to share it with non-sync friends. It just remains the very best introduction, I think, to this entire topic. And I don't think really we're going to get a better one, probably. At least not for some time. I mean, how could you top it? Like I said, it's so concise and so good, and the tone is just right. And that's a very hard thing to do, to strike all those things at once. I'd rather expect that it was a bit of cosmic magic working through Joe to make this piece end up as perfectly as it did. Of course, Joe can't help himself. Or at least that's how I perceive what's going on here. So he's going to end with a little something else, carried interestingly mostly by the images. So let's watch how this piece closes out now. We're almost through it. So this was great. Very cool. I love this. Beautiful. That's a kind of like strange, like new video aesthetic or something. We're linking multiple videos together and transitioning between them on the basis of the shape and look of an object that is common, I just think you could develop entire formal practices around just that one idea, So I just think Joe's doing such cool stuff here. We see it go back, too. Where does he grab it? Oh, he's zoomed into it, and then we're in this scene. He's forming portals, tunnels between media properties. Do people not get that? Do people not see that? Do people not understand what a cool thing to do that is? I just don't get it. This piece should have been... It deserved... it got plenty of attention. And plenty of praise, in fact. But it deserved a different kind of praise. My smart friends ought to... watch this again. I don't know. I should say some of my smart friends did perceive this, just so that Joe knows. It was sent to me by a real genius, in my opinion. And he totally, he didn't, like me, he didn't get the sync aspects of it. But like me, he did see that it was an amazingly beautiful and incredible video piece. He got that it was really smart and sophisticated and was doing all these cool formal things. So there were people out there who grasped that, of course. I just wish that the media response to it was a little more nuanced. I also know that, of course, this is just what allowed it to blow up. It blew up precisely because Joe engineered it this way. He engineered it in a way where it could be related to in a shallower way by a mass media kind of audience. And so, it was successful. It was shared as just a kind of WTF YouTube video. It worked tremendously well as that. Of course, it's rather more than that. It's quite a bit more than that. So I believe this is a piece that's going to have a very long arm through history. I think it's one that's going to be remembered. Here we have, sync contributions from these amazing folks and other synchromystics. Some of these people I know, and some of them I don't, Barely Human 11, that was Joe's tag. And then, throws it to the Godfather, I suppose. This is the guy who really first sort of connected these ideas, at least in a major visible way in the pop culture. Now, this is something that moved me very deeply, and I'll appear back on the screen for this part now. Gosh, my hair is doing something strange. There we go. This section of the piece moved me very deeply, because it's just a very heartfelt letter to Robert Zemeckis, and I wonder if Robert Zemeckis ever read it. I wrote a letter like this to John Carpenter, wrote and sent that letter. And I got back the tiniest little bit of acknowledgement. Just the tiniest bit. I felt that I got back a wink, something like that. I didn't get a response from John, but I got a response from like an intern of his or something that said, John read your letter, and he just wanted to send his regards, but he doesn't want to talk to you. Now, I don't know. Maybe John didn't even read the letter. Maybe there's just a stock response, But I like to think that John read it, and that he thought, there's a young magician out there just turning on. I'll just stay away from that and let that go its own. It is wisdom, So maybe I got back my little wink from Master Carpenter. I don't know. I'd have to ask Joe if he ever got a wink back from Master Zemeckis. I think maybe he rather did, because don't some 9/11 numeroglyphs appear on the clocks in the most recent Zemeckis production? I think that came across the kitchen sink at some point. So I want to read this out loud, actually. Dear Robert Zemeckis, today I love your work more than ever before. Since early childhood, my family gathered around the VCR to connect, laugh, and live through your films. This could be describing my life, by the way. I think this applies to very many people. It was like a popular family film. But I was way into it. I mean, I watched those films so many times and acted out the parts and memorized the lines and all that kind of stuff. It says, in the pantheon of directors, you're my personal favorite. No one could deny that, this movie has affected all these people. I'm just going to summarize it. I feel a little weird reading someone else's heartfelt letter. But then Joe just lays it out quite explicitly here. This film is magic. Whether by attuned skills or conduit channeling, your own hands and efforts have infused this trilogy with enchanted substance and undertones. So you see, he can't really... It's tricky when you make a piece like this. We're making work about real magic. And perhaps we're doing real magic when we make this work. And we just have to own that, of course. So here's Joe owning that. But you also have to play nice with the audience a little bit. And so Joe also did that. And it just makes for a very interesting movie that kind of keeps shifting around on you. Like, okay, what is this guy really saying? Is he saying it's a conspiracy thing? Is he saying it's a weird art project? Is he saying it's real magic? That seems crazy. Is he saying, what's going on? And well, just what a wonderful, weird movie this is. Back to the Future predicts 9/11. I love things like that defy easy categorization. And that's one of the things that made me fall in love with it instantly, even before I understood its depth. My expose, of these depths also seeks to emulate this practice. The obscured subtexts are what comprise the enduring qualities of ideas, products, people, and art. She's talking about the archetypal layer of the image here, fundamentally. With over half a century of cinematic success and continually compelling audiences to return for more, Back to the Future is without question cut from this rich cloth. He's trying to tell, hey, Bob, I noticed that your movie is really like a religious movie. It's a big mythic story. And then he says, whatever inspiring forces work through you and with you, I'm certain of both their cunning and benevolence. It's my intention to inspire audiences to gaze with wonder into the archetypal subcontextual fabric of your films. Perhaps in the process, you will join them with fresh eyes in coming to know and understand why your work has wielded such profound magic. So many minds for so long. Well, I would just like to add that very strongly now. I would like to heap some energy onto that and say, hey, Bob, if you don't know this about your films, you really ought to. You might want to take a look. So, I don't know. That's my opinion. I hope this message already found Bob and he has taken a look and maybe he has kind of wondered to himself, weird. Maybe I did precog 9/11. I say that for many reasons. One is kind of this, just a reason that I wish we could get. Sorry, I'm now talking about sync, game strategies or something. But I wish we could get some celebrity director to acknowledge the possibility that their film may have involved an unconscious 9/11 precognition. I think that would be a huge deal for us. And so, here's Joe's little prayer that maybe something like that could happen in this film as well. So far, no one's really bitten that I can think of off the top of my head. The closest thing I can think of is Alex Gray talking about his 9/11 precog experience. Of course, that wasn't a film, that was a painting. And similar statements made by Tom York and Stanley Donwood about their 9/11 precog experience. and maybe some various other musicians. But for some reason, the film worlds, it seems we just have not gotten this recognition still. Even at the basic level of kind of a director saying, hey, I made a movie, and then this thing happened, and seems like it was about 9/11 to me. Am I wrong? Was there maybe there is someone? If anybody knows, let me know. It's an interesting question. Well, so anyway, I love how this works as a kind of meta moment in Joe's piece as well, because we see Marty with the message, and now here's a message that Joe's composed for Bob. I have a right to be on a first-name basis with Joe because he's a person I actually talk to occasionally and so on. Robert Zemeckis, of course, I don't. I just think it's funny to refer to these people by their first names sometimes. I refer to Jung often as Carl. It just brings me great pleasure. Okay, so here we are moving through the very end of this, and there is a little visual tag, I believe, at the very, very end. Because don't we get this amazing spread that connects Marty to Doc via the wire? It's kind of strangely, perfectly placed wire. Does Joe bring it back in with a... We just hear that wind sound that implies that the DeLorean is about to travel through time again at the end of the movie. Just remember that sound. Back to the Future is really a haunting movie in many, many ways, isn't it? Oh, I just wanted to say, one of the reasons that message touched me so much when I read it, later, after I had come back to the film following my Sync awakening, was just because it normalized my experience, because I had written a letter to John Carpenter and felt kind of crazy for having written it and sent it and all this. And then it's like, oh, no, wait, look, this other person went through just the same thing with this other director. So there's just something bigger going on here. You know, it's not just me being crazy about John Carpenter. Now it gets to be me being crazy about a whole bunch of other movies and directors. But it's just another thing that might indicate to you that something very real and serious might be happening here. So I just want to push that again. You know, I'm a weirdo and maybe a bit nutso or something, but I am a very smart, lucid person. I have a very functional left hemisphere. I do and have done in my life extraordinarily technical work and all this kind of stuff. So there's no shortage of neurons that know how to discriminate information properly and make sense of things in a linear, rational way in my brain. And I would just like to say that as a person who is like that, I think that this film is expressing something very deep and very profound and very real. Not just Back to the Future. I mean, Back to the Future predicts 9/11. And yeah, so there, basically. And I think that the history of cinema is going to vindicate me on that eventually. And will vindicate Joe and all the rest of us who have made this kind of work. You know, who knows, of course. It's not necessary that happened for the work to be good. I just really have a feeling it's gonna, is all. There's just too much going on here that's too good and too cool. So, even if it isn't what we all think it is. It's a match. Joe's showing us a beautiful match here. This is one where, unfortunately, I wish it was in color, because then we could see the match much more clearly. However, by placing it in black and white, it does allow Joe to emphasize this incredibly weird line that gets drawn right through Marty's mouth and right through the message and then kind of right to Doc's, I don't know, esophagus or something. There are many seemingly impossible alignments like that in Back to the Future. It's also a moment where Doc kind of cups his hands around a red stoplight in the distance, like accidentally. He's like pointing at something, but it just like perfectly catches them. Oh, and then we do get it in color. Well, how excellent. So that's an interesting ending, and that is really the ending. I think we're done now, right? Yeah, we've looped back around. So that's it. That's Back to the Future Predicts. What a great piece, obviously. And let's see, what else to say about it? That little section at the end. I think border with the city, yeah. To say about it. He ends with a slightly extended kind of quote there, you know? We just hear all this dialogue. It's information about the future. I refuse to accept the responsibility, you know? I read in that a little bit of an almost personal statement, perhaps. The responsibility of making this film. I imagine it must have been a bit of a crazy thing to make this and upload it and let it exist on the internet, you know? Knowing maybe on some level that it was going to blow up in a bigger way. And then when it did, to like watch that spell catch fire, you know? Joe must have passed through something very unique with that experience. Well, so anyway, I think maybe the end speaks to that slightly. Something I wanted to add in here, just for Joe, maybe, if he ever watches, is, and maybe not just for Joe because it's just a weird thing, but first of all, something about Back to the Future Predicts that maybe isn't widely known is that there were like many versions of this. He had earlier versions of this that were shown in various capacities and were at like sync summits and things, and some of which are even online in various forms at various points. And I've also even seen some of the very early like sketches and ideas and drafts that exist of it. And so it took a long time to develop and was developed in intense collaboration with other sync heads, as you can see in the credits that he provides at the end. He's also someone who made a bunch of other sync video before he arrived at this. One that I really like is called Lloyd, Our Christ Bearer. It's really an excellent piece. He also made one about Back to the Future and JFK. Conspiracy of Grey Aliens or something, I think is the title of that. Also very interesting. And so that's a weird kind of reading of JFK material in Back to the Future. Now, I don't know a lot about the JFK thing, but I am kind of interested in the Zapruder film as the other big American trauma that involved video recording. It's kind of 9/11 and Kennedy assassination. Because, of course, the Kennedy assassination involved the head being blown open, so it seems somehow in the myth image space to me. Well, so then I found this some time ago and never really got a chance to talk about it. Frame 313 in the Zapruder film is the image where we get the first really strongly visible blast. He's already been shot before here. There's like that shot that, what does it go through his neck or something? I'm not really up on my JFK conspiracy knowledge these days. There's a time where I watched the Oliver Stone film like many times and then went online and like watched like other documentaries and like researched the crap out of it, but I don't remember all these details anymore. But so this is a numeroglyph. That means it's an image that corresponds to an archetypal picture, which in this case would be two serpents and like a column in the middle, which is, if you were to just kind of cram them all on top of each other, then you'd have a caduceus image, which is a very archetypal image that relates probably to some idea about the nervous system. I was going to try to draw it on top of myself, but it's not an available thing at the moment. So anyway, it's an interesting numeroglyph. And then we also have in the wider like framed version, in the wider framed version of this, bringing in some kind of Virgo concept here. In the wider framed version of this, a 9/11 match flows by in the ground. right sort of, it just culminates in that frame. So I have this way slowed down. That's like a family. I think it's like dad in, excuse me. I think it's dad in black and white. So that corresponds to North Tower projection space color elements. Then I think it's like mom, and then that's like the kid. So that would be where the explosion would go. And then immediately, so that's not a very strong match. That's just a family that has a dad in black pants, and it is matched, but it's matched in such a low point correspondent way that I could never diagnose something like that as a match, of course. But then this starts to enter over here. And here we have a lady in a red dress right next to her hair there. Well, to me, this is really simply too much, because now we have a man in white pants, black sort of raincoat. So you see that the fedora is now there by implication, because that often goes along with the raincoat. It's like just a noir kind of image. And then he's holding up a camera that's almost like directly filming this camera, the Zapruder camera. So it becomes it's like a falling into infinity type of match. A match that we've looked at in previous contexts here. It involves this kind of infinity loop staring idea. And so this comes together as a Mr. N type. And then over here we have the woman in red, who I think is even a redhead. Comparing this now against, because if that's like an unambiguous brunette, I rather expect that's a redhead. I wonder who these people are, and if there's any way to know that. Find other pictures of them, maybe. But so one last interesting thing about this is that they exit the frame at precisely the frame number that results in JFK's brains getting blown out. Right? See this over here? She's just exiting the edge. And as soon as they're off, there it is. Hold on a second. Make sure we catch it precisely. There it is. So yeah, she just exits the edge, and then that's when we get this like mind blow brain detonation thing. And then that happens on frame 313, which of course then makes it a very famous frame. So I don't know, it starts to feel like a little premonition about 9/11 happened here in the JFK event. Or something. Okay. Well, that's it. I really truly should move on with my day now and do some things. This was great. I can't wait to do the next one. I wonder what I'll do next. One last thing I wanted to do as part of this is I wanted to look at comments on the actual Back to the Future Predicts YouTube. Because I just want to kind of document a little bit of the state of this. And so, first of all, look at this. This is, did Back to the Future predict the actual future? This is now an idea that's out there. And I think Joe's film had quite a lot to do with launching it into the general kind of pop cultural meme space. So here's the actual page. You can see right now that we're at 4.5 million views. We've got over 14,000 comments. And so here's why I'm justified in giving away Joe's real name, because he made a decision to do that eventually. Very many of us keep our sync lives a little separated from our normal lives. It is a bit like coming out of the closet. And I rather wish that people were a little more attuned and sensitive to that, maybe. And a little less running around calling us crazy all the time. But, that's just how it is, I guess, when you're actually a marginal person in a marginal situation. You make people frightened, actually. So anyway, here's a bunch of amazing comments. Wow, Mr. N.M. That's a great comment that deserves a like. Yeah, that's really true, isn't it? Because those are the correct times there, 8:46 a.m. Wow. Yeah, and that's also true. The runtime on the original film is 116 minutes. And in fact, many of these films have that kind of runtime, 116 or 119. In fact, the film Arrival, which is all about aliens making contact with us through a big rectangle image display with a picture language that then creates non-linear time things in this lady's head, is 116 minutes long. I think pretty much right on the dime, or close to it. He hasn't uploaded since this. The government's seen this and taken it. No, chummy macaroni. Joe's just fine. I talk to him every now and then. You know? Should I say? I don't know how much he wants me to, you know. He's a basketball player and has a whole life doing that stuff. You know, he's a very put together person, in fact. The closest thing any movie or TV show comes to this, that's not true. There are very many things that come very, very close to this. But The Lone Gunman is a very, very spectacular one, Leo. It is truly amazing. Pilot episode. It's hilarious. It's an episode called Pilot.
Liberty and Washington.
They discover a false flag operation. And in fact, it was released...
I'm going to crash the plane into the World Trade Center.
August, March or April 2001. I don't remember. I believe it's precisely 191 days prior to the actual event. So that's a numeroglyph and a number that is an image match for the actual date 9/11, considered as this little logo. A mall is like a trade center. Did anyone get that? Yes, and in fact, I have something very strange to say about that, which is that they built a mall at the Trade Center. It's called the Oculus. It's this building. It's built in the form of a giant eyeball. And it's like a luxury mall on ground zero that also has a giant display in it that is now also being used to show art in addition to advertising. Because you see, it's as if Back to the Future revealed to us information about architectural changes that were going to take place at the site. It knew that the place where the terrorist attack happens, i.e. the Twin Pines, was going to be a mall eventually, and then now it is. It's like the biggest, most expensive, craziest, weirdest mall in the country because it's built on a grave, which might also remind you of Poltergeist. And in fact, Back to the Future isn't the only film that seems to predict architectural changes to the site. Hellraiser 3 does that as well, because it predicts the placement of the lament configuration at Ground Zero. And we have that there as well, in the form of the performance hall that I believe is opening in 2020, and which was noted by the general pop cultural community, and by the horror community especially, as being profoundly similar to the lament configuration. So much so that we all rather suspect, just everyone who looks at that building suspects that it must have been modeled off of it explicitly. So anyway, a big WTF man is deserved here, exactly. Marty McFly showed up to say, whoa, this is heavy. I've got to give that one a like as well. Well, I've got to say, the texture and the timbre of these comments has changed a bit. I haven't looked at these in a couple years. And the last time I checked in, it was kind of a lot of assholes. Now it seems to be more people relating to this in variously sort of, real ways. And this is a form of lesser magic or sigil magic. I hear someone who knows something about something. Hello, brother. Anyway, I guess that's probably just as good a way as any to conclude it. I'm really going to kind of sound off now and say, see you in the future. Bye, folks.